Hi everybody, today I'll be talking to you about folkloric ritual and the Orthodox religion and the beautiful relationship they have in Romanian context. I'll be using two case studies to put an emphasis on this relationship, namely funerary ritual or funerary ritual and the magic jar ritual. Before I go further, I want to say only in the beginning I touched upon the idea of why I consider folkloric ritual or folkloric traditions pagan, so I hope that's enough. If it's not enough, you can ask questions at the end. Please do feel free. I want to accommodate you a bit with my understanding of paganism, so you know where I'm starting with my argument. I know it's a complex phenomenon. I know paganism is not one religion but many. In a sense, it's a coalition of elements bound together by common ground. As far as I'm aware, it has no known starting point if we have to look at the term pagan. Academics claim that paganism is comprised of a large bulk of contemporary traditions, practices that reveres nature as sacred. It draws on religions of the past, I would say the present as well, because or some cultural aspects of religions in the present. Traditions, Druidry, uses rituals it made creatively and shares a seasonal cycle of festival, a matter which is very important, especially when I will present later the folkloric rituals of Romanian people. The Pagan Federation, which is the largest, if I remember correctly, umbrella federation for paganism in Europe, has this as the leading principle: love for and kinship with nature, rather than the more customary attitude of oppression and domination over nature. Reverence for the life force and its ever-renewing cycles of life and death. Obviously, I think this could easily be this could easily constitute a definition of paganism, if you want. Let me just run quickly through my understanding of the history behind the term. I know in 2nd and 3rd century, pagan meant those not enlisted in the militia of God. That is, if I remember correctly, the Roman army that was Christianized. With time, obviously, as we know, even in common time, for those people that don't research this into more detail, common time tells us that paganism is usually perceived as those that is of a different creed than Christianity. In 18th century Romantic literature, the term came to mean country dweller because of Victorian era, when, especially in Britain, they had this old flower power love for nature all of a sudden. In the present, the English Oxford Dictionary claims that paganism is anyone who is not a practitioner of a major institutionalized faith. It did survive until today, as far as I'm aware, as a term for non-Christians, and there are a lot of debates about the terms in which paganism splits, as I'm aware you all know, neo-paganism, paleo-paganism, and so on. Then the question that follows, and that I want to pose, are folkloric traditions, folkloric rituals and traditions to be considered pagan? I'm so remarkable, I didn't know you're going to be on the presenting board, so I took one of your papers in here as an example. There are a lot of ethnographers, folklorists, academics that believe paganism has plenty of its elements stem out of folklore. Masaryk Sabina mentioned that at the level, there are two levels at which, for example, neo-paganism can be understood as a folkloric tradition. First is the fact that the Western spiritual tradition from which paganism draws was never codified in a single text. It was preserved in a similar fashion like folkloric ritual myth and tradition, that is through orality, through generational passage, and so on. And secondly, the spiritual tradition of paganism has been part of a subculture that is under the radar of the official institutionalized faith, if you want. A matter which, see, it happens also for the folkloric practices in Romania. And lastly, pagan came to mean those who, on the detriment of Christianity at one point, choose to believe in the old religions, practices, beliefs, or the local unit of government. Now, this last point, the local unit of government, applies very well, especially in rural areas, I would say in a lot of Eastern European countries, where it is traditions, folklore, myths, and legends that represent this, this local unit of government. Let me now go forward to the Romanian folkloric rites and traditions. They play a major role in the life of Romanian common folk even today. I cannot discuss folkloric ritual without including the notion of magical thinking, which is basically this perception and interaction of Romanian common folk with the world within which they find themselves. And this magical thinking did not go extinct, despite of the modernized lifestyle, if you want. It adapted to urban areas, which is very nice. It means you can actually analyze it. And in the rural areas, it just suffered minor modifications. Romanian culture is different than its neighboring countries in its original way of describing and interacting with the sacred and its elements. You can see this in the difference between magic and witchcraft. Usually in the Western countries they're dichotomic, but in Romanian culture they're not. They mean one and the same. Then we have an interesting blend in Romania between folkloric ritual and tradition in Christianity or Orthodoxy. This beautiful blend, Meciariadic called cosmic Christianity. I do feel like Eliade gives more credit to Christianity than the actual folklore elements of it. So therefore I tried to do some research and found another academic who coined the term folkloric Christianity for the same relationship, which I feel just gives a bit more justice to folklore. What are then these Romanian common folk? I'm not aware if you can see this because I have the Zoom meeting panel in here. This is the beautiful, on the right, you see the depiction of the beautiful ritual of Papa Rudet, which is a rain summoning ritual that involves only virgin females. In this slide, I will just run you through some of the folkloric rituals, not all of them because this list is not exhaustive. The ritual is done with the virgin female. She has to dress into a skirt made out of plants. She goes from courtyard to courtyard and people throw water on her and they chant and they dance around her in order to summon the rain. We also have other types of folkloric rituals. For example, we have seasonal rituals, which if you remember it was in the definition of paganism. Burning the river spirits in summer, this is just one example of many. Or for example, winter solstice carols in winter. We have funerary rituals. It's a lot of them. These are not just an act, but a complex chain of ritualic actions with a certain specific aim in mind. We also have calendaristic celebrations and the rituals required for them. For example, St. Andrew's Day, people believe that, and it's a belief that is especially spread in the Mediterranean area, especially on the archaic populations, that the dead are coming back to life on certain days. And therefore, on St. Andrew's Day, there's a plenitude of rituals that people do, especially in the rural side. Some of them include rubbing garlic at the doors and then saying a certain narrative in order to protect themselves from the interaction with these living beings, with this living dead. Taking the fertility of the land is one other example that I want to give you. This is very interesting. You basically have to be naked at night on the full moon. And if you want to steal the fertility of your neighbor's patch, you go in there with a shirt and you start gathering the dew. Obviously, you have to be well versed into this ritual. You have to gather the dew throughout the night, and in the morning, you mention certain ritualic words and you start pouring all that water on your land. And voila, your neighbor is now going to die of starvation. You're going to have a lot of grain for the next year. How did these folkloric rituals and traditions survive despite Orthodox Christianity being the official religion of Romania? To begin with, we all know that Christianity had the dualism it could never escape of. On one side, it was this pious and innovative, as we saw, religion, but on the other side, they were prepared to, if you want, even obliterate. If this is a bit of a long shot, but I was even obliterate anything they deemed heretic at one point in history. We see this in Catholicism and Protestants during the Inquisition, where most of them were capital punishments for anything they deemed heretic. Obviously, Orthodoxy is not devoid of any shed, any spilled blood. We know the Orthodox, the witch trials in Russian Orthodoxy, they all had capital punishment, as that set the tone for them. But the more southeast Europe you go, the more you start to notice an Orthodox Christianity that's more solid, that is with less dogmatic arguments, which meant they wouldn't have such a direct oppressive attitude towards anything they deemed heretical. More so, Romanian Orthodox Church never punished heresy with death. For Romanian Orthodox Church, Satan never enjoyed the power it had in Catholicism. So therefore, any heretical or demonical influence could be easily counteracted with church canons or prayer. And I added on top of that, the fact that the image of Satan in Romanian cosmogony is not necessarily a bad one. He is the creator of earth. It's just that the God tricks him, or it, tricks Satan to give the planet to him, if you want. We did have Lutheran Church in Transylvania that had a direct aggressive attitude towards folkloric rites and practices, but what is important was that it was Orthodox priests. There were Orthodox priests that were fighting against Lutheran Church, claiming that they should not have this attitude towards folkloric rites since they are rooted in what they call national feeling. Heretical endeavors, if you want, or pagan endeavors, were of interest for the clergy themselves. There's a document called Pravila de la Govora, which basically was used to pass down laws for the clergy. And in many of these laws, we see priests who are targeted, who were officials of these folkloric rituals. They were making use of their paraphernalia. They were part of them in one way or another, and so on. Even going to the point where they started writing compendiums of these folkloric rituals. The widespread of these practices, paired with a long history of their usage, meant Christianity could not subdue them. In theory, the Orthodox Church was against them, but in practice, the clergy not only were practicing them, they were writing compendiums of them, they were protecting them, as we just saw. And another important argument is that common folk saw Orthodoxy as just another ally. Yes, they accepted Orthodoxy, but the only reason for which, as far as my research went, and I could find out, the only reason for which they continued to practice this folkloric rites was because they needed something to protect themselves or to put themselves at ease in their interactions with the sacred, in the profane world. We do have historical evidence of the longest interaction between magical thinking, that is folkloric rituals, traditions, and so on, and orthodoxy. Two illuminist personalities, Petru Maior, Dositeu Obradovici, they criticized the 19th century Transylvanians, who, despite their appartenance to orthodoxy, continued to practice folkloric rites quite a lot. Nicolae Iorga, a great Romanian historian, in his History of Romanians, noted that the large pagan side of Romanian Orthodoxy is to be seen at the level of folklore, where the paganistic past is to be found. I paraphrased with exact same words. And in the 19th century, we did see there was an attempt of the Romanian Orthodox Church higher officials to educate the clergy on the demarcation between what is Orthodox sacrament and liturgy and what is folkloric ritual. It did not succeed. Their main goal was to steer away the clergy from these practices, but it did not succeed, since even today the priests still play an important role in these folkloric rituals. Now let's just go for the first case study. Hopefully I have enough time. I will just briefly mention this one. This is the Romanian magic charm. The beautiful folkloric ritual called the Scântec is done by an enchanter that you see here, or enchantress, as you see here on the left, is making use of paraphernalia. It's very complex depending on the affliction that you want to treat or the curse that you want to send. It has a narrative that you have to spell, and you have to follow, as I said, certain ritualistic actions. Magic charm is the most military widespread element of Romanian folklore. It's a complex ritualistic medical tool, which means the enchanter has to have a good knowledge of the afflictions and the way they affect the body. And as you can see here on the scheme on the right, the enchanter is the one that negotiates with the realms of the sacred and the profane. Is used when a person is taken out of the normal order of things, but also to put a person out of the normal order of things. So it has an ambivalence to it. It can be used both as a malevolent or benevolent ritual. It's used by Romanian folk in their daily lives. Not so nowadays, it depends on the region in which you go. And is one of the rituals of folklore that interacted extensively with Orthodoxy, reason for which you see a lot of magic charms that have Orthodox elements in their narrative. It was so valuable at one point that the common folk started to ask the priest to do it instead of having an enchanter. What was then the official discourse of the church towards this folkloric ritual? Well, again, in theory, as I mentioned earlier, they didn't like it, but in practice, the clergy were practicing these. They were making use of the paraphernalia. They wrote compendiums about them, and they even tried to Christianize them. Since at one point in our history, it was the only literate minority in Romania was the clergy. And we see how they began to insert them in the liturgical books. When we look at the 1834 and onwards, a few other editions of the Ecologian, that is the Orthodox liturgical book. In Romania, they call it Moristelnic. In 18th and 19th century, archbishops began a process of removing a plenitude of these rites, spells, apotropaic prayers from further editions in order to stop the priest from being the enchanter, or in any case to accept the existence of these folkloric rituals. No luck whatsoever. Even today, as I mentioned, the priest still plays an important role in them. so much as that people started to have divination rituals done according to the way the priest interacts with these folkloric rituals. I took the liberty now to compare an apotropaic prayer from the Euchologia on the right and the magic charm on the left. I don't have time to go into full details, but what I will do for you is mention two main elements of the magic charm that are present in the apotropaic prayer. If you remember earlier, in the earlier slide, I said that the enchanter has to have a certain knowledge of the affliction in the way in which it affects the human body. An enumeration that we find a lot in magic charms. And we see it in here. For this magic charm against neuralgia, from ears, from nose, from the back of the head, from gums. A matter which we also see in the apotropaic prayer, which is towards the end, from his brain, from back of his head, from eyes, from lips, from teeth, etc. Another important aspect or important element of magic charm is sending the affliction to liminal spaces, that is far away, at the level of the prophetic. And we see that in here, come out and go at the edge of seas, in the stag's horns, in the hind's hoof. A matter which we also find in the apotropaic prayer, when the priest at the beginning of the narrative says, commanded to go, to live far away in certain lands and walk by foot. Lastly, just as a quick mention, the attitude of both the enchanter and the priest in the apotropaic prayer are both condescending and almost as cursing. Ultimately, the only difference between these two would be the ritualic action, paraphernalia that is used, and who is actually the enchanter, either the priest or a member of the community. Now, for the second case study, hopefully I have time, the funerary ritual, how orthodox it should be and how folkloric pre-Christian it is. I took the liberty to take one of the leading books on the Orthodox ritual of burial. That is the book belonging to Professor Ungureanu, the Orthodox ritual of burial for everyone's understanding. He was the chief editor for the Romanian Patriarchate. And in his introduction, he claims that Orthodox funerary ritual in service is not just a simple ritual, but a detailed confession of Orthodox faith. Interesting, because a bit further down the line, he goes on to mention that folkloric traditions and rituals began to take over from the Orthodox tradition. This is in the present times. Yet, surprisingly, he also encourages the argument that the Church does not intend to get rid of these rituals, finishing his introduction with the idea that traditions are a scaffold upon which Church can rely in times of need. Then, after reading his book, I took the liberty to split the funerary rite, the Orthodox funerary ritual, into 4 stages according to his book. The first stage, which is the liturgy for the hard departure of the soul, this is done when the defunct is struggling, or when the person is struggling to die, or when the soul is struggling to leave the body. It is believed in Romanian Orthodoxy that the devil is sending the soul before the person actually dies to contemplate the sins he has done. So therefore this liturgy is done to help that passage. Second stage, wake pre-procession rites. These include washing the body, which is done to symbolize baptizing, placing of the body in the coffin, alongside with the necessary items, obviously a cross or the staff, which is basically just a candlestick in which people put a lot of candles. Then the parish is announced by sounding church bells and the reading of the pillars. This is how they're called in Romanian, the pillars, which are the 4 Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The third stage of the Orthodox funerary ritual is the one when the dead person is taken to the church or the chapel. There's a liturgy done. This liturgy prepares the soul of the defunct by asking for forgiveness. It's done 3 days after death because they keep the defunct for 3 days in remembrance of Jesus Christ. A memorial service called Panihida is done before the defunct is taken out of the house towards the chapel. Obviously, there's certain elements that compose the funeral procession. A cross at the beginning, followed by a banner, followed by the staff, followed by the priest, followed by the cart or the chariot in which the defunct is carried, and ending with the people that came to the procession. And the last stage of the funerary ritual, the grave rituals, a mixture of wine and anointing oil is thrown on the body of the defunct, making the cross sign. Once the coffin is descended into the grave, the priest throws some dirt on the coffin, claiming that the earth belongs to God, just like the body belongs to God. At the end, a wooden cross is placed at the head of the grave to deter evil and as a symbol of hope. Now, this phrase right here that Professor Ungureanu put, to deter evil, shows very beautifully how even though even though Orthodoxy has been in here for years, they adapted to the creeds of people because there's a constant belief in the rural areas, or specific, as I said, to Mediterranean people, that the dead are going to come back to the living and they're going to roam. And this cross is exactly there for that. What is then the funerary ritual?
Like 2 minutes, Robert.
2 minutes, okay. In practice, the funerary ritual is different. For each stage, I enumerated in here a plenitude of pagan rituals that are added. For example, at the point of death, instead of the first stage, instead of the liturgy for the high departure of the soul, people use magic charms because they believe the priest hasn't done a good job and they actually need an enchanter to do this. We have wake rituals, obviously the second stage. All I'm going to mention in here, although you can read many of these, is the complex ritual of putting money into the defunct's pocket in a belief that he has to pay the porters in the afterlife. And this tradition or this ritual is taken further by putting a sheet on the ground that the whole funeral procession has to step on. Also, we have to believe in the living dead, who, if a person was born with a placenta on their head, they're going to become living dead. So other rituals are added for this type of defuncts. Third stage, literally the procession. Again, I will just go and mention just one of the rituals that is still done in certain parts of the country. That is the ritual of closing the door. When the defunct is leaving the house in which he's staying, the family starts whispering, a bit morbid if you ask me, starts whispering to him, we hold on to you, but you should not hold on to us. They then close themselves in the house with a key and wait there for 5 minutes until a member of the procession comes and opens for them. This is to break the bond between the dead and the living. A matter which we also see in the fourth stage of the ritual, that is at the grave ritual. But this time it involves cuffs, and it's just a matter of not untying the cuffs from the dead person. We also have the ritual of passing hands over the grave, which is to appease the soul whose body has just been descended in there. And I only added an additional stage for its importance and for its interesting character, post-mortem rituals, from which I want to mention fumigating the grave to appeal what the Romanian common folk call the dog of the earth, who's supposed to live in the graveyard. And if you don't do these specific rituals, he's gonna meet you up and kill you, basically. What are then the conclusions? Hopefully the case studies and the arguments that I presented earlier are pretty clear. The Romanian culture presents us in an interesting modern case of Orthodox Christianity coexisting with these folkloric rituals, practices, and creeds. The relation between these pagan rites and practices and Orthodoxy has been one of codependency, cohabitation, and in any case, protection, I would say, and in any case, one in which the church failed to suppress them despite numerous attempts. We saw that the involvement of the Christian clergy in the life and practices of Romanian common folk is not to be disregarded, obviously, since even today the Romanian common folk make use of the priest. And to conclude, folkloric rituals done by the Romanian common folk are perhaps nowadays more criticized by the secularized youth population rather than the actual church itself, as we have seen. And the Orthodox Church continues to see these practices and rituals as a scaffold upon which to rely in times of need. Thank you so much. Hope I wasn't talking too fast. You have been hearing this interested in these where I took the pictures from. Thank you.